The problem was when I would walk into larger accounts, they would see, this young woman, and when they found out I owned it, they're like, "Oh, did your dad start this business?" And I was like, "No,
excuse me,
no." And then they said, "Your husband?" And I was like, "Oh no, little old me."
You're right.
You are listening to The Anatomy of a Startup, a Wellbeing Coffee production. Enjoy.
All right, well, this is it. This is episode 1 of the podcast that we're going to be doing. It's called Changing Directions, but we'll get there in a minute. We'll change to that direction after we kind of talk about the podcast in general. But I was interested in kind of starting off this project, just thinking through our successes and failures since the acquisition, and thinking, what did we do right? What did we do wrong?
A lot.
Yeah. Do you mean right or wrong? Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
We did both. Yeah.
And really breaking down, were we lucky? I'm sure we were in some areas. Were we, skilled and successful? And I'm sure that was true in some other areas. So, I mean, I'm just kind of a cerebral person to begin with.
Sure.
So I just like to sit and think. I mean, I'll be at home sitting and thinking, what was that luck? Did we,
right?
Did we corner the market right there?
What made us different?
What made us different? So that, I mean, there's going to be probably 16 episodes or so. I mean, we're probably going to have some more seasons after that. It'll be different stuff, but just breaking down every little piece of the business. And so that's kind of my hope for each of these episodes, is looking at maybe a financial aspect over here and then a bigger
Sure.
picture aspect over here. And that's my hope for the podcast, is that, budding entrepreneurs and people who are interested in starting their own business can hear all these little pieces and start to think about how they want to structure their business.
That's really what I want out of this, because we are really busy right now with post-acquisition, the transition, and kind of starting basically a new company.
Right.
And so if there is any way for me to give back through that success over the last 7 years, I want to do that. And I didn't have many mentors starting, and so if I can kind of shed the light on what I feel like we've done, what God's done, what opportunities are provided, then I want to do that. I mean, how else, other than some luck and opportunity, but mostly blessings, could we go from a startup making, I think we did $16,000 revenue in our first year.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't start until August, but how do we go from there to being acquired for a multi-million-dollar acquisition with a very strategic partner without a little bit of hard work, opportunity, and blessings I feel like came from God and guiding us?
Yeah, no, completely agree. I have to dig into a lot of that. That's how these questions are framed. Almost every episode will be talking about, looking at this financial aspect. How did we approach that correctly? How did we get lucky in that area? How were we blessed in that area?
Right.
So I think we'll see a little bit of that in each episode. And with that, we can just go ahead and start the first one. So it's about changing directions, because early on in Wellbeing's history, we were a drive-through kiosk, which was retail. Well, there's more before that too, but kind of primarily we started out as a drive-through kiosk, which did retail sales. It was a cafe on wheels.
Yes, it was, and a small one at that.
Yeah. And we sold just cups of coffee, one after another, to anybody who would drive up and buy from us.
Right.
So we did switch to wholesale eventually, but what did you like about that direct-to-consumer, cup-to-cup sales kind of model?
I think like most entrepreneurs wanting to get into coffee, there's an excitement about having a cafe and creating a brand and connecting with your community and getting feedback on what people like and don't like, and just getting connected in the community as well. Starting out in retail, nobody knew Wellbeing, nobody.
Yeah.
And so how would I even start selling wholesale when that's such a saturated market? And I think with retail, it was a little less risk, which is great because we only had so much money. And so if we spent all that money trying to do something that didn't work and build the brand, then we wouldn't have made it very far. Now, what's great about retail is that aspect of community and building the brand, but what's not great about it is you're going from, no brand name, selling one cup at a time, trying to build that loyalty. And it's really tough because some months would do really well and some months wouldn't. And that was just the risky part of it. But it was also a lot of fun. And so I'm really glad it started that way.
Yeah, same. It was fun. That's where I started, right? Day one of the kiosk when that opened up, the drive-through.
Right.
So, yeah, it was fun. It was hard to make money. Selling one cup of coffee at a time, there's razor thin profit margins. And talking about that, when you were trying to figure out like pricing and stuff, or when you were setting up the retail side of things, what went into that decision? Did you do a bunch of market research? Did you just say, cost of goods times 2? Like what helped you set those prices initially when you were thinking about starting?
So there were a couple things I had to consider. One, yes, cost of goods is huge, but I don't want to just go out and get cost of goods from anywhere. I needed to figure out from top down. So what can I ultimately charge for this latte or cappuccino? Then I read and also had a consulting company that I hired to kind of help me because I knew nothing. And they said we need to make anywhere from, our cost of goods need to be 25 to maybe 33% of the cost. So if it's a $3 latte, my cost really should be no more than $1. And that is all ingredients, the cup, the lid, the stir stick, everything.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gave me a place to figure out, well, what are my cost of goods? Knowing we were teeny, we didn't have the buying power. And so our cost was a little bit higher than obviously what Starbucks would have.
Right.
So I knew where I was starting at the $3 to $4 range. And so I knew what I had to get my cost of goods to. In addition to that, though, I didn't want to price at the cheapest. You can go to a gas station and get a cheap latte, but it tastes like a cheap latte, right? And so if people see a similar price of what they would pay at a gas station, $2 for a latte, they're going to correlate that with a cheap cup of coffee. And so I really wanted to be close to Starbucks pricing, and I'm really thankful Starbucks paved the way with that. I remember people are like, man, I would never spend $4 or $5 on a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
But they did.
Who's laughing out? Yeah.
I know, right. And so I knew that I could as well, but I also had to be consistent in that specialty cafe pricing. So yes, market research and just figuring out what cost of goods are and what I have to make. And we really did get our cost of goods down to about 25%. So,
that's great.
We were successful there.
But of course, profit is profit per cup times number of cups.
Yes.
So
you have to think, one person comes through the drive-through, even if they spend $4 on that cup, we've made maybe $3.
Yeah.
And so it's $3 profit, not taking into consideration that employee that is making the cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So on slow days, we really lost money.
Yeah. And slow time, there's obviously, it's a coffee business. It's busier in the mornings. Now you did have, you tried to counter that some by doing smoothies and snacks and things
we did.
For people who worked out in the afternoon or whatever.
I knew we had to build the ticket sales. So every time a car came through, what else could we sell them? Because we wouldn't be sustained on that $3 profit of a latte. And sometimes they just got a cup of coffee, which was $2.
Right.
So we had to have add-ons that we pushed. And ultimately, I think that's what saved us, or at least kept us afloat for a while, having those add-ons. So that's something really important for business people to think through. It's not just what you want to sell, what does the customer want to buy from you?
Yeah.
And so thinking through that, I think really helped.
Yeah. So, it was slow. It was slow sometimes, and it was hard to get people to come to that location.
It was.
Yeah,
that was our downfall.
That was, I think, ultimately did us in. It wasn't a bad, GPS location, right? That intersection is a good intersection.
Right. 60,000 cars passed it a day. The problem is they were going really fast.
The wrong way.
The wrong way.
Yeah.
Yes. So coffee, it's so important to be on the right side of the road so people can turn in really easy of the way they're going to work.
Yeah.
So for us, being off Capitol Boulevard, we were on the northbound side when most people would travel southbound to go to work.
Yeah.
And so they would have to do a U-turn to come in to Wellbeing and then take a right and do another U-turn. There's just no way people are doing that in morning traffic. Just didn't happen.
Yeah, we'd get some people, but yeah, it was
Right.
pretty rough. Do you think if we had a better location that we'd, and we were getting that 60,000 car a day, the true volume from that, do you think we'd still be open as a kiosk? Do you think that franchise model you kind of thought about early on would be a thing?
Potentially. Yeah. I mean, money talks, right?
Right.
So if we were making a lot of money and it was a lot of fun, then yes, I could have seen us putting several of those booths around Raleigh-Durham. I mean, if you go out west, you see like Dutch Brothers and all these, mom and pop stands like that all over the place.
Yeah.
And so when I was doing some of the market research, John and I went out to Portland, and we were going to do kind of a coffee tour, and it turned into a wine and beer tour as well.
Right. Well, it's got to.
But I know, yeah, balance, right?
Yeah.
So I thought if it's successful there, it's going to be successful here, and it was a great concept. But you're right, being on the wrong side of the road, and ultimately, again, I think it was a part of the plan. Like, I didn't know where this company was going to take us, other than I wanted to be philanthropic with it. I wanted to give back. And so, again, money talks. So if we weren't making money, we had to pivot. And so I do think we would have been in retail more, but I'm really glad for that failure because I'm really happy where we ended.
Yeah, same. We wouldn't be here making this podcast today.
Right, yeah.
So how much, so that way we weren't doing well. How much longer do you think we could have made it? Like, at any given point, how close were we to failing?
Daily.
Right.
Day by day. There again, when you talked about were there certain blessings or certain things that kind of kept us going,
Yeah.
It would be crazy, Chad. Like, I never wanted to tell you guys as employees because I didn't want you to be freaked out as I was in the middle of the night.
Right.
When I would wake up and I'm like, Lord, you got to help here because we're about out. And there would be crazy little things. Like, do you remember the coffee cart from Southeastern?
Yeah.
So I didn't know exactly the size I had to purchase for I just thought we're going to be outside, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
The problem was when we would drag it inside to the library, there was only a certain amount of space, and so
Right.
I had to have a certain size cart. Well, I, jumped the gun and was impulsive like a lot of entrepreneurs can be, and I bought a cart too early. And so that was a problem. But the thing is, I got such a great deal on this cart. It was at an auction. And so I got it for, I think, $5,000, $5,500, which was a really good deal for it. And so when it didn't work out, months later, because I had to rebuy another
Right.
cart, which took cash flow. A few months later, when we were really starting to struggle, I said, I'm just going to put this on eBay. And it sold for $17,000. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And so that sustained us. And there are so many of those stories I could tell where something like that happened. One more is John, my husband played college football, right? So he played, daily hardcore and then, never got hurt.
Right.
And then he's, with his company and they did a flag football, corporate event and he tore his meniscus, right?
Wow, John.
Flag football. And so the funniest thing was, workers' comp ended up giving him, I think, an $8,000 check. And that sustained us.
Right.
And it's just insane. But yeah, so I'm probably going in a tangent, but as I normally do.
Yeah, no, I mean, day by day, we
Yes.
found money somewhere.
We did.
Did we ever get to a point of, were we ever in the black and were we profitable?
Some months, yeah, for sure. So the first couple of months we opened, the excitement brought in a good bit of business because a lot of my friends were trying to support us and we did a lot of stuff with the community page, but then it died off pretty quick in the summer because it's so hot.
Yeah.
People don't really want coffee. And we did some iced coffees,
Right.
but it actually wasn't that popular back then. Iced coffee and cold coffee is more popular now.
Yeah.
So the smoothies sustained us there. But then when fall picked up, then it really did start helping, getting us into the black. Like I remember that October, I think we did $10,000 in sales and I was ecstatic. So we made money that month. But then several months prior, we didn't. So it was just like this the whole time, up and down.
Yeah. Do you know why they call it in the black? I learned this the other day. Or like in the red or in the black. It's because of Excel. People use. Yeah.
No, I did not.
Yeah,
did
so
not
you
know
can
that.
format it so that a certain way you say like accounting, and then like if it's negative, like if you're not making money, it'll be colored red, the text.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. As much as anyway, thought that was fun.
I love that.
Money, right? So we were barely profitable sometimes, if we were lucky.
Right.
Was the money put in up to this point purely self-funded?
Well, yes and no. When you're small, especially doing something like a cafe, the banks do not want to give you money.
Right.
Because it's a really high risk business.
Yeah.
And so they kept saying, have you been in business 2 years? And I'm like, no, I just started. That's why I need the money. Right?
Right.
And so they're like, well, you have to be in business 2 years. I'm like, well, how do people get funding if
Right.
you have to be in business 2 years before they'll give you money? It takes money to make money. And so John and I had to go in some personal debt, and we got some personal loans, and we borrowed against investments that we had saved. And so we just had to hustle and pull money together however we could in the beginning.
Yeah. So we've already kind of gone over how things were looking a little grim. There wasn't a light at the end of the tunnel really.
Right.
Day by day, we were like, where's the next money going to come from? But then near the end of the life of the kiosk, we kind of did a little throwback to Southeastern Seminary's campus,
right.
and picked up our first wholesale account, and that's how
right.
we switched over to wholesale. That was the start of it anyway. Tell us about how that started and how that happened.
Right. Well, we pulling the cart in and out every day of Southeastern, being outside, I would see S&D Coffee, these coffee trucks that would come and bring coffee to all the offices of Southeastern, which I think they had 30 plus offices they delivered to. And I'm like, man, we're here on campus. We have better coffee.
Yeah.
Why can't we deliver to those offices? And so actually it was an employee that said, hey, we should talk to the company and see, or the school, and see if they'll let us. And so eventually I did. And I went in and talked to Hutch, the guy that kind of helped us get started with the operations. And I said, I'd like to serve coffee and provide it for the whole school. And he was like, we already have a contract for that. And I'm like, well, but what will it take for you to give that contract to me? And he said, you got to be bold in what you ask. I didn't know any better, to be honest.
But what if you didn't have a contract with them?
Why don't you sign one with me?
Yeah.
He said, it's not that simple, Melissa. You need to have equipment that not only you install, but you maintain. You need to have all the supplies. We don't just buy coffee, we buy creamer and sugar, and you have to have the people to deliver it, and it's just more complicated. You need a website so we can order online.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I can do all of those things. If I set it up, will you give me a shot? And I don't think he believed me.
Right. He's like, yeah,
and he
go
was
ahead.
like, yeah, sure, I'll put you in touch with my assistant, and you can talk to her about it.
Right.
And so I talked with Ashley, and Ashley really,
shout out.
Yes, Ashley King. Whoop. So she spent some time with me, and we just discussed what I would need to provide if this was actually going to work. And so I started working on it. And a couple months later, I go back and I say, okay, I have a website, and go to Sam's Club. Here's all the list of items that you guys can order. I'll deliver. We'll work on how to get equipment for you guys, and so on.
Yeah.
And he was like, still hesitant. And I'm like, what the? You said, and then he still was hesitant. So I talked him into letting me do a coffee tasting on campus, and we had a bunch of the staff there, and they got really excited. And then it still wasn't going anywhere. And so Travis, who was over facilities, said, hey, I can make the decision for my 50 employees.
Yeah.
Why don't you bring, your brewer and grinder in here? So long story short, Travis took a risk on me. People loved it in facilities, and then they started bragging to all their friends around campus. And so when Hutch and Ashley saw that, they gave me another building, and within a year, I had the whole campus. And that was more profitable than the drive-through, and it only took me a few hours a week. So I'm like, light bulb, like, why am I not doing this? There are businesses all over Raleigh-Durham, and I'm just spinning my wheels here with the kiosk. And so immediately, one, I was totally drained emotionally and financially. And I said, I have to shift gears now before we run out of money. And so we sold the kiosk at a big loss, but best move ever. And we jumped right into office coffee.
Awesome. Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, but in those early Southeastern days when I think that was probably almost our only account at that point, we did eventually get into the bean to cup machines, but we had those early bean to cup machines you found in Georgia on like eBay, and they were horrible.
They were awful.
we knew we were onto something with that. I mean, I really think that showed us.
It did.
Later on, like, this is something we need to keep in our back pocket for when we find a better machine.
Yeah.
But they would
like old school Seikos. Like, they were terrible.
Yeah, they would like drain into those tanks in the bottom and like solidify. It was gross.
It was gross.
Yeah.
But I knew we needed to have coffee that we could, and that was more vending, where there were, people would buy it and the cups would get blocked, and it was just a hot mess, right? That was another one of those stories of a way that we were provided for financially, because I bought 10 of them, and I actually bought them from a neighbor that lived across the lake from the house that we were living in at the time, and he was selling them. I mean, I think I saw it on Craigslist. So I went over there and I bought them all. I can't remember, but it wasn't very much. A few $1,000s, I think. And then when we realized this was not going to work, then I put them online, and I think we sold them to the guy in Georgia for like $10,000 or $11,000. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's just one more thing that helped us get by. But it did open our eyes to that's a way that we could use our own coffee, but sell it by the cup, because in office coffee, nobody wants to brew pots of coffee anymore.
Yeah.
Like the old school glass carafes, it burns the coffee, oxygen, it just tastes terrible. So I knew I couldn't just do our coffee in a pot. They wanted Keurigs.
They
but
did.
Why did they want Keurigs?
Just single serve.
Yeah, single serve. So that's like all the rage now is single serve. So how can I do that? And I really didn't want to get into K-Cups because of the sustainability of it. It's terrible for our environment, and it's so expensive. But I thought, okay, these offices are paying 60 plus cents per K-Cup, right?
Yeah.
If I get these expensive bean to cup machines, they could pay the same, but my profit margin's massive,
Yeah.
I mean, I think per cup of coffee, it cost us 7 cents.
Oh gosh. It's pretty low. Yeah,
It's
black
7
coffee.
Yeah, and
pretty
then
low.
If we sell it to them, I think our cost was 25 to 30 cents.
Yep.
But it still was great margins.
Yeah.
And so, that terrible mistake of buying those terrible machines actually helped us in the long run.
Yeah, and we had them. I remember them sitting in your garage, and and then we were working out of your garage at that point.
We
too,
were,
right? So
and the upstairs.
Not only were we making better profit in this new wholesale environment, but we also didn't have, like, costs were lower. Like, we didn't have the rent and the electricity and the water. I mean, I guess you did with your home bill.
Yeah, but it didn't add much more to it.
No. What other ways did costs go down? Like, what started changing about the finances in that regard when we switched over to the wholesale model? Like, what other costs went away?
Right. I mean, business insurance, workers' comp, benefit. I mean, anything that goes with employees that you have to pay. I mean, a lot of employees don't realize it, but they get their paycheck, but their employer is having to pay payroll taxes, which can be 10% of their pay. They're having to pay for, vacation time, benefits, whatever. It just adds a lot of cost to it. So we didn't have that one because you were a 1099, so I didn't provide any of that for you. But, we were working out of the house.
Move.
Right. And so that's how we afforded to pay you, though, is because we paid you out of John's paycheck. And I still didn't make money. I didn't pay myself for 4 years until we were profitable. But that was our only expense. Other than we ended up buying the first Wellbeing van and had it wrapped in bright green. So it was like a billboard going down the road. So we had that expense, which was, $400 a month. And insurance, but we were able to do it pretty cost effective.
Yeah, and that's the cost reduction part. But I think also we figured out that, we're not going to be able to get our coffee supplies prices down as low as some of our competitors, but we didn't need to either.
Right.
We were able to keep those prices a little higher because we could just sell better customer service, which was a big need for people who were asking for, OCS service. They were not getting good service from our competitors. So we're like, great, we're more expensive, but we're also a lot better than them.
Exactly. And I think that's one thing that we really sold on. That and the quality of being a roaster gave us a lot of credibility too. Yeah. I think people liked the fact that it was a woman-owned business. The problem was when I would walk into larger accounts, they would see, this young woman, and when they found out I owned it, they're like, "Oh, did your dad start this business?" And I was like, "No,
excuse me,
no." And then they said, "Your husband?" I was like, "Oh no, little old me."
You're right.
So, and I think a lot of people would get offended at that, but I loved it because we were unassuming.
Right.
And we were broke, but that creates humility.
Yeah.
And people are drawn to humility. And it also taught us to hustle affordably in the beginning so we didn't get in a ton of debt. Like,
Yeah.
we were in debt, but not near what we could have been.
Yeah. What about the sales function? So, like, how did the retail marketing, right? I mean, they're kind of different things. Retail is more of a marketing thing, and wholesale is more of a sales thing.
Right.
But so, talk about that transition, going from like printing thousands of flyers and distributing them to having to cold call and.
Right. So, thank God, but sales is my natural ability. Somehow I'm wired to get excited about something, and then it naturally gets other people excited about it if I believe in it. And so I believed we would do the best job possible. I knew our coffee was fantastic, and I knew we were going to fill this niche that wasn't being filled in the triangle. And so if I could get in front of the decision maker, I would get the contract.
Yeah.
The hard part was, how do you get in front of these decision makers? I didn't have time to go out and cold call and do everything else because I was packaging coffee, I was delivering coffee, I was doing invoicing. So I didn't know how to get in front of those people. So there was an opportunity to work with a company called Carolina Pure, and they needed to have coffee service, but they only did water. And we only did coffee, and I didn't want to get into water. But we had, when we were calling on Burt's Bees, which I got in through a friend who helped me get in front of the right people, they needed water. And so I ended up meeting the owner at a chamber event, because networking was really important to me. And
Chamber of Commerce.
Yes, Chamber of Commerce. And so I saw, he had a Carolina Pure water shirt on, and I said, hey, I need to team up with someone who can do water coolers.
Right.
I do coffee. And he said, I was just about to call, Capital, who was our competitor, because I need coffee. People want an all-in-one vendor.
Yeah.
And so I said, can I take you to coffee and let's talk about it? And so we got coffee, and then realized it would take a while to set up this partnership, but there was something here.
Right.
And that was a big turning point for the business, because his company was basically all sales, and then they would put in the coolers, and then it's that recurring revenue stream.
Yeah.
For us, we're more of the service. So sales is important, but we need to be there weekly or biweekly.
Yeah.
So long story short, it worked out really well for a couple of years until we got big enough to where we really needed to bring sales in-house. And so, but they got me in the door to a lot of our clients.
Yeah, and that I think right when we started partnering with them is when we really took off. I think that was probably our biggest year or two of growth.
Yes. And it helped them as well, because there were a couple of really large accounts that they wouldn't go with either of us unless we had the other.
Yeah.
And so, because there were several times where they chose to partner with us because of the coffee.
Yeah.
So he helped a lot, and I think we helped them a lot. So it was a good partnership while it lasted.
So we made it. Our wholesale business was doing good, and that's kind of, we just grew that more until the acquisition, basically. Mm-hmm. And so that's great. And then, so I kind of want to step back and think about the lucky versus skilled versus, whatever aspect of that, in terms of pivoting, right? So I think in some respects it was a little bit, a lucky that we found the right, outlet for, you could kind of tell that the retail side of things wasn't working. So, all of a sudden we had this opportunity with Southeastern, but I think you were looking for something, right? Like you kind of made your own luck, and were thinking, I do need to pivot, and I kind of just have to constantly be on the lookout for opportunities to do so.
Right.
Like, you're not just going to be able to just shut down your whole business, close your doors, and then go start a wholesale business.
Right,
like, it has to be this kind of like slow and quick at the same time turn.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things for people to keep in mind in business is putting their ego to the side. So many businesses fail several times before they can actually work. So that's a typical thing entrepreneurs face. One thing I had to realize is, even if I have a dream and it doesn't work, I have to be humble enough to make that pivot in the right time. Sometimes people just don't want to give up because they don't want to fail, but that's ultimately will make them fail for good.
Right.
And so one of the most important parts of owning a business is being true to yourself, really checking yourself, is my ego taking over right now? Or do I need to be humble enough to admit that I failed and then pivot? And I think ultimately that's what happened. And that's one thing I constantly ask God for, is keep me humble, no matter the success, because when some success gets to your head, then it's going to turn into that ego that can bring a company down. So, I'm really glad I was able to say I failed, but I'm gonna try again.
Yeah. What were the signs that you were looking for, or what signs did you see or notice, or maybe, and this can be in retrospect as well, that we were failing, right? Because it's not necessarily that you're not making sales, or that that you can't make a decent profit. Like, those are all problems that all startups face,
right,
as you're building. So that those aren't necessarily signs of failure, but
right.
What do you think is?
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because a lot of businesses don't profit for years.
Yeah.
So it's not just that you're not profiting right away. No businesses will, unless they get really, really lucky, or they already have distribution lines set up. So I couldn't base it solely on money. Now, you can base it on if you're about to be out of money.
Right.
That's one thing to gauge.
You can't pay your employee that next day.
Right. You can't pay in
That's
coffee.
a sign of failure. Yeah.
That's definitely a sign. But another thing, too, is my emotional state, my physical health, mental health was not doing well. I mean, I couldn't sleep. I was worried all the time. I was working all the time. So it was hard to be a mom and a wife, and to stay healthy and to even eat healthy. And so I noticed, if I'm the one driving this company forward and I'm not healthy, then I'm not going to lead a healthy company.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one sign that I wasn't in the right space, and I didn't have the mental real estate to keep moving forward. And so that's what was attractive about Office Coffee, because, with retail, if somebody called in sick or, quit or was fired, then it's on me. And so that was really hard to keep up with. I mean, I had really young kids. They were 1 and 3.
Yeah.
So I was a little crazy for starting when they were so young, but I just wanted to. So that I knew, getting into Office Coffee, I could secure contracts, and then I could deliver on a set schedule Monday through Friday. So I could have my weekend breaks with my family.
Yeah.
And so John and I just sat down and put some non-negotiables together. And one of them was I would have a set work schedule, and the kiosks didn't fall within those parameters. And Office Coffee could. And also, you have to know yourself as an entrepreneur. And I know me, I am like all or nothing. I can work really hard, but then there's times I just can't. I just need a break. And so I knew with retail, you can't just be on and off. With wholesale, you can. If I build this business where I can work really hard, sell some accounts, get them started, then I can hand it to my staff to run the operations. And so as my mood and push to move forward would fluctuate, because it would, then I could handle that with Office Coffee, and it did work. So again, I just had to know myself and know if it was working or not.
Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. If the things that you're good at are, and the needs in your personal life are not lining up with the business that you're trying to push forward,
right?
Don't those will butt heads in,
right,
and kind of fall apart,
right? And so running a business, you're not always going to be feeling 100% perfectly healthy. There are seasons, but if you know what you're doing is right, then you can stick through those seasons of really hard work.
Yeah.
If you are unsure if you're going in the right direction and you're exhausted, it's like running a race and you have no idea where the finish line is and if you're going to make it there. I just didn't have it. But I knew with Office Coffee there was so much more potential.
Yeah.
So yes.
Okay. So then finally, I would ask, if you had to close up shop today and go start a retail business, like right now, you had to do it, you had to restart the drive-thru or something like that, what would you do differently? What advice would you have for somebody who's doing that, knowing what you learned from the failure of the retail that we used to do?
Right. And I'm glad you asked that, because I don't want people to get this wrong. Retail's not terrible.
Right.
It's just we're in a changing world right now, and sometimes we have to think outside the box. And retail's really fun, but I would just always warn budding entrepreneurs, what's your motivation? Why do you want to have retail? and what are the reasons. And so they can really figure out, is this the right track or not? But for retail, I would just make sure, one, you have enough money to know it's going to take a while to build that loyalty. And then think about not just getting the cheapest everywhere. Like, for instance, our location was terrible because I was too scared to sign a lease that would be in a good location because it's expensive.
Yeah.
And so there are certain areas in your business you need to invest, even if it seems really expensive, to make it work. I'd rather spend more money in the right areas to be successful than the least amount of money and then still ultimately fail.
Yeah.
So location's really important. What are you selling? What's your niche going to be? How are you different? Which we're going to talk about in another podcast as well. But how you're going to stand apart, because if you're just another Me Too and you're in a average location, it's going to be really hard for you to be successful.
Yeah.
And then next is, what do you ultimately want? Do you want a job where you're the barista, or you're the one selling in the clothing store or whatever you're looking to start? Or are you wanting to build a business where others are going to be doing that stuff?
Yeah.
So you just have to think through a lot of different things and really have a piece about where you're going before jumping into retail. It is riskier.
But it's doable.
Yes, and I would do retail online. Any type of retail, I would do retail online versus brick and mortar.
Yeah, I think you were talking about location. I think you always hear that old adage, but yeah, it's true. Location is everything.
It is.
And that if you're going to take risk anywhere, it's probably on that, getting
Yes.
that good spot.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this has been fun.
Yeah.
We did it. First episode.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, we'll come back with a whole bunch more. And I'll see you.
A lot to come. So for people who are really thinking about getting into business or struggling, I just hope they can take little nuggets from what we talk about, so ultimately they can get to success a lot faster. And so thanks.
Come back next week. Hear some more of those nuggets.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you.